There's been quite a lot of attention lately related to this organization, if you can call it that, called QAnon. So I thought it was prudent that this phenomena gets looked at through the eyes of Professor Poppycock, because if there's one thing he's capable of dissecting, it's Poppycock. Now, according to the most relevant information available, this whole thing began as a chat forum on a site called 4chan back in the early 2000s, where it lived for a while, and then Fred Brennan and Jim Watkins started 8chan back in 2013. A couple of real disarming fellows for sure, but in my opinion, not exactly the guys who are going to turn the world upside down. Then you have a guy from New Jersey, of all places, named Jason Gallianis, who apparently figured it'd be a good idea to latch onto the Q train, so he set up a dedicated website so that all those Q brokers out there would have a place to hang their hat so they could rant about politicians and celebrities who brokered deals for babies so they could drain their blood in the basement of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. Anyway, at this point, the whole thing is a fairly quiet, underground sort of thing, where like-minded folks can spread the gospel for what they claim is a massive deep state insider movement within the government to arrest all kinds of politicians who are totally corrupt and probably need to be hung as traitors. The forerunner for all of this is none other than Hillary Clinton. Yeah, she's a real demon, that one. Her list of dead bodies along the way is pretty impressive. But is she actually the devil? No, I think she's just another corrupt, power-hungry politician who pushed the cart for her philandering husband until it was her turn to drive the bus, only to discover that a lot of people didn't like the way she drove. This, of course, led to a lot of name-calling and boiling tempers by the orange one, and she eventually lost her bid for the big brass ring of the Oval Office. Hell, if it hadn't have been for the untimely death of John Kennedy Jr., she would have never gotten a Senate seat from New York. Speaking of that untimely death, there are those that place that corpse on her list as well. But I digress. Back to the Q movement. So, after a few years of this being somewhat underground, a lot more people started climbing aboard the Q train, and this puppy started really rolling down the tracks. There was QAnon shoppers showing up all over the world. Of course, there's the big kid on the block, the QAnon in America. Plus, you got your British QAnon. There's a Canadian QAnon. There's a QAnon for the EU. They even got one down under in Australia. Which of course means now there has to be marketing involved in all of this hyperbole. I mean, you can't have a viable movement without lots of coffee mugs and t-shirts and stickers to put on your car and patches to sew on your jacket, posters to hang on the wall in your man cave. And let's not forget those big flapping flags for your pickup truck. Yeah, you gotta have that marketing. Then things start getting a little more serious and stranger at the same time. People around the country start committing crimes and claim they're doing it because they're following the plan laid out by Q. And this person or that thing is evil, and it has to be stopped. One guy tried to hijack the Hoover Dam while in an armored truck. What part the dam plays in the Q agenda is still unknown. Another fella, Edgar Welsh from North Carolina, drove up to Washington, D.C. with an AR-15 and was going to save all the babies down in the pizza parlor basement, only to discover once he got there that the pizza parlor didn't even have a basement. Another guy whacked a mob boss because he was actually a reptilian masquerading as a human. Then there was the two guys that showed up in Pennsylvania to stop the ballot theft by the deep state ballot thieves. I'm sure there's others as well, but these incidents stand out the most to me. Then, in the spring of 2020, when the coronavirus kicks in full blast and everyone is locked down, a whole new element creeps into the paradigm. And this is that the virus and the lockdown is all a massive black flag operation being perpetrated by the deep state. And by God, the mighty Q is not going to allow this to happen on his watch. Military personnel start cropping up on the QAnon landscape, and even a few politicians use this theory as a basis for their election campaigns. And one lady down south named Lauren Boebert in the 2020 election gets elected to Congress basically on a QAnon platform. Those folks down south and the rednecks are into this QAnon thing big time. It goes right along with their big old pick-em-up trucks and assault rifles and tactical gear festooned with the QAnon patches purchased, shipped, and supplied right to your door by Amazon Prime. Marketing, baby. You gotta have your marketing if you want to be a big-time movement. Now Q and QAnon seems to have a different flavor for different kinds of people. They do seem to be big on the anger and fire for sure, but they also like to be a kindler, gentler Q. So they have their cute little bunny rabbit that will guide you along the way down the rabbit hole. They even have a church of Q, although the image they present sort of reminds me of something I've seen before. Nothing better to give a movement credibility than to associate it with a church. One big church-going fella named Mike, he wanted to join up, but Mama wouldn't give him permission. Getting back to the military presence in the QAnon movement, one big name associated with it is former 3-star General Mike Flynn. This guy, along with his family, posted a video where they were all taking the QAnon oath of "where goes one, so goes all" tagline. Is this all just a result of him getting canned from his job at the DNI and later as National Security Advisor? Or is there something deeper going on with this? His attorney, Sidney Powell, sure is neck deep in this whole QAnon stuff. She spouted stuff that was so far out there that even level-headed Rudy Giuliani had to distance himself from her. Now, when Rudy thinks you're too far out there, you must be way out there. Lindsey Graham once stated publicly that he thought the QAnon movement was, and I quote, "batshit crazy." Now, how crazy is it to think that JFK Jr. is still alive and is actually seen in the background at many Trump rallies because he's a Trump ally, and as we all know, the Kennedy family has always been a big Republican supporter, right? That is not to say that John Jr. was not a staunch advocate for free expression of thought, because he was. His short-lived magazine, George, right out of the gate, was a source of controversy and debate. He published that he was going to get to the bottom of his father's assassination, and some claim that this is the real reason his plane was taken down over Martha's Vineyard. rogue military elements that are the puppets of the CIA took aim and blasted him right out of the sky. Theories, and in particular conspiracy theories, have always had an appeal to a certain demographic among the general public. There are conspiracy theories centered around a vast array of topics. Take, for example, the words in the pyramid on the back of the $1 bill, Novus Ordo Seclorum, which loosely translated means, from one comes all, and the all-seeing eye on the top of the pyramid is a sign of the influence and dominance of the Masons. This particular element of the design of this bill was supposedly instructed to the U.S. Mint by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his then Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, who were both longtime Masons and apparently 33-degree Masons. It is claimed that this is the highest level one can reach in this secret organization. And let us not forget the cherry on the top of the conspiracy theory sundae, that the earth is flat. So, is it the Masons that are running the show? Or is it the infamous Rothschild family who have had control of much of the world's money for literally centuries? Or is it George Soros? Now, Georgie boy certainly has made a mountain of money over the years and has spent it in a lot of odd ways. George Soros has financed everything from the development of the radar range, which at the time were very expensive to buy, but now they're commonly known as microwaves and they're pretty cheap, to political campaigns for both Republicans and Democrats, because he's got to cover all the bases, right? Up until the recent claims that it is he who is silently funding both the Antifa movement as well as the Black Lives Matter movement. It seems that whomever one chooses to look closely at, they are all playing a financial chess game, with the little guy, the average citizen, as the pawns on the board. And the board sure seems to be our beautiful planet. A movement, any movement, whether it's the Save the Whales movement or the climate change movement or this newer one called QAnon, it has to have some way of keeping the lights on in whatever office they may be utilizing. That, of course, requires funding of some sort. It could be from grassroots support, or it could be from some deep pocket financier who has sympathy for the cause, or in some instances it's funded by the government and is part of a PSYOP or a psychological operation. The CIA is big on this one. They always like to say, win their hearts and the mind will follow. Well, that philosophy certainly hasn't worked out well in Vietnam or the Middle East. I realize that many of you may be wondering, what does all this talk of Vietnam or the Middle East have to do with our own homegrown QAnon movement? Well, the most recent and highly covered escapades of a certain fringe of the Q movement involved a lot of ex-military personnel, and that wasn't by chance. Most, if not all of these people, have been exploited by the government to put forth an agenda and take military action all over the world to satisfy the desires of a group of people that will never, in any way, shape, or form, place their lives in danger. But they'll let the lowly soldier do it for them. most of whom do not come from high-dollar households. Then they'll cast them aside like some old worn-out shoe and hope they'll all just go away. You don't think these people are going to be pissed off? And election after election, where the new guy says he's going to change the landscape, he's going to clean out the swamp, he's going to provide transparency to the public, he's going to yada, yada, yada. These folks, and a lot of others along the way, finally came to the realization that the people that they elect to represent them are nothing more than two-faced liars who are only really interested in what is going to benefit them the most. Screw the little guy. Then along came this web-based portal of sorts, propagated across the internet and social media platforms, that seemed to have the answers they so vehemently had craved for so long. So they jumped on board the Q train. I can understand how a lot of people will say that these people are insurrectionists and should be tried as traitors. But if one was to look closely and examine our Constitution and the oath that lies therein, one would find that it says that we that take that oath are to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So, if they believe the ones in power are actually doing harm to the American people on a widespread basis, and history itself pretty well makes the case for this claim, then why would it surprise anyone that they would take action to take back the government that has been stolen from them? Wasn't it their own government that trained them to carry out such deeds? People oftentimes forget that it was our government that trained and supplied the very people that transformed into the Al-Qaedas and Talibans and the ISISes of the world. No, it doesn't surprise me in the least that these people would finally take action. For me, the surprising part is that it took this long for it to happen. Somewhere along the way, the government figured out a way to bamboozle the public into believing all their warmonger endeavors were justified and in the best interest of the nation. Poppycock. I grew up at a time when thinking was part of the equation, especially critical thinking. That has gotten lost along the way as the populace is more focused on the newest app or the newest model of phone, rather than trying to pay attention to what's going on around them. QAnon seems to provide many people a way to express themselves and develop bonds. For some, it is similar to the bonds that they created while they served. For others, it may be they find themselves as the odd man out, and this, quote, brotherhood gives them a place they can call home. Whatever the draw may have been, this particular movement has drawn in a lot of people, and the chances of it going away anytime soon seem pretty damn slim. What really needs to happen is for the elected officials to actually listen to the grievances these people have and to take action to alleviate those grievances. But that most likely will not happen because those in power see no benefit, by that I mean money, to provide any medicine for these decades-old wounds. And that is truly tragic. Not for only me, but for all the other Americans and citizens of other countries as well, who suffer from the same malady, and there seems to be no cure for it. So, in conclusion, I will say this. Whether you think everyone involved in this movement is just batshit crazy, or if you just find their behavior unsettling, the fact remains that they are here, and for better or worse, all of us are going to have to come to grips with that fact. You can't censor their speech because we thankfully have the First Amendment to protect our speech. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that you have to agree or disagree with what others say. Look at it like a TV. If you don't like what's on, then change the channel. We as a nation have always had the bad habit of condemning things we disagree with. I'm fairly certain that if any one of you took an honest look, you'd find within yourselves things other people disagree with. Are we then to silence you because others disagree? Of course not. We can always just change the channel. Don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button.